Welcome to the Indian Council of World Affairs, India's oldest foreign policy think tank.
Many people interested in foreign policy have told me when they come to the Indian Council of World Affairs in Sapru House, they feel a great sense of affinity with this institution because this was where the serious study of international relations in India all began.
The ICWA was set up by a small group of public intellectuals some years before our independence, because they felt it important that India have an independent perspective on international affairs. Since then, the ICWA has gone from strength to strength, and it has been a long journey, almost 75 years. One particular milestone in that journey was in 2001, when the Indian Parliament passed an act declaring the ICWA to be an institution of national importance. We thus became a publicly funded independent think tank. Our governing council is headed by the Vice President of India, and the External Affairs Minister is its Vice President. We have three focus areas. The first is research, which is carried out by in-house faculty. Very rigorous research on different parts of the world, encompassing the domain of area studies.
The Council has been very proactive in conducting dialogue and discussion on African affairs and India-Africa relations in order to promote an understanding on African affairs in India, an Indian perspective on Africa, given the priority that now Africa has in Indian foreign policy.
Within the Council, we have a renewed focus on Latin America and the Caribbean region. So we're looking through our studies to find new areas of cooperation such as renewable energy, climate change and the space technology.
Interacting with leading experts, diplomats, media persons and academicians has helped me nurture my research further.
We recently had the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook, which has a lot of convergence with the India's own Indo-Pacific construct.
The learning curve at the Council has been tremendous, and it provides a strong foundation for my future research.
The second is policy. Because we are a think tank, and being close to policy, commenting on policy, and helping formulate policy is an essential part of our functioning.
I think in the new age, what we're seeing much more of is that people want to be involved in foreign policy thinking. They want to have a voice. Now, this is where ICWA comes in.
This is the platform where I, for many years, have come and interacted with the best in the world.
ICWA provides a valued platform for visiting foreign dignitaries to interact with informed Indian audiences. The third is outreach. This is most important because of our role as a public-funded independent think tank, and we carry this out by associating ourselves with as wide an audience in India as is possible. Colleges, universities, other think tanks, and of course with similar institutions elsewhere in the world.
What I would call the democratization of Indian foreign policy. It has moved to distant corners of the country. It is no longer a preserve of Delhi.
ICWA has a robust publications program which includes papers by the in-house faculty, invited papers and commentaries, and books on foreign affairs by not only former diplomats and established academics but also by upcoming scholars. Our journal India Quarterly is being published since 1945. ICWA's publications are also being translated into various Indian languages. What is ICWA's role as we move into the future? The vision of the institution is to stay abreast of all the momentous changes taking place in the domain of foreign policy. New areas are emerging. There are strategic technologies, there is climate change, there is artificial intelligence, and there is cybersecurity. How can our research faculty and the audiences that come here be better informed about developments in these areas? How can we write and formulate research papers to give policy inputs that help in government policy formulation? These are the emerging challenges for ICWA and form a part of our vision for the future.
A very good afternoon to everyone joining us here. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the ICWA webinar. My name is and I'm a research fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs in New Delhi. The Nelson Mandela International Day is celebrated every year on 18th July to shine light on the legacy of Nelson Mandela, who left an indelible mark on the 20th century and shaped 21st century South Africa. To commemorate Nelson Mandela Day, today's discussion will highlight Mandela's achievement in working towards conflict resolution, democracy, peace, and reconciliation. The participants will reflect upon Mandela's lifelong struggle for freedom, human dignity, equality, and justice. Participants will also highlight how Nelson Mandela's struggle for freedom inspired the world. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists. We are extremely honored to have Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam as the chair and the moderator for this session. Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam is an Indian diplomat who retired in April 2020 from her last position as High Commissioner of India to the United Kingdom, envoy to Commonwealth, and representative to the IMO. In a career spanning about 38 years, she has served in various diplomatic capacities in Indian diplomatic missions in Damascus, Kathmandu, Brussels, Islamabad, and New York. She became head of mission in 2008 and worked as India's High Commissioner to Ghana and then to South Africa. She returned to the Ministry of External Affairs from South Africa to take over as Secretary West during 2017-18. Thereafter, she travelled to the UK as the First Lady Career High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Second Lady after Ambassador Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. Our lead speaker, His Excellency Joel Ndebele, is the High Commissioner of South Africa to India. Prior to this, he served as the High Commissioner in Australia. Mr. Ndebele has been a member and leader of African National Congress since 1972. In 1976, he was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in Robben Island prison, where he joined President Nelson Mandela and other leaders during their incarceration there. He became the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Chair of the INC and helped to establish peace in the previously conflict-torn province. He served as a national executive of the ANC from 1991 to 2017. Our next panelist, Mr. Mandla Langa, is a novelist and a biographer of Nelson Mandela. As a scriptwriter and a journalist, Mr. Langa has held various ANC posts abroad. He was the convener of the task group on government communications in 1997, whose finding led to the restructuring of the apartheid government's communication systems. Some of his published work include Tenderness of Blood, A Rainbow on a Paper Sky, The Lost Colors of the Chameleon, which also won the 2009 Commonwealth Prize for Best Book in the African region. He co-authored Dare Not Linger with Nelson Mandela Archives and is a fellow with Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies. Our next panelist, Professor Anand Kumar, is presently a senior fellow in the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. He retired as a professor of sociology from Center for Study of Social System, Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2014. He has also taught at the BHU, Albert Ludwig University, Johannes Kepler, Innsbruck, and Tufts University. Some of his major publications include Understanding Globalization and Emerging India, Political Sociology of India, Quest for Participatory Democracy, Gandhi Lohiya Jaiprakash aur Hamara Samay, and Azadi Loktantra aur Parosi Mulk, among many others. Our next panelist, Professor Neera Chandhoke, is currently a distinguished fellow at the Center for Equity Studies, New Delhi. She was a professor of political science and director, Developing Countries Research Center, University of Delhi. Written widely on democracy, Indian thought, social rights, historical injustice, and affirmative action, she is the author of Rethinking Pluralism, Secularism, Tolerance, Anxieties of Coexistence, Democracy and Revolutionary Politics, Beyond Secularism, The Rights of Religious Minorities, among many others. Currently, she is working on Peacemakers Nelson Mandela, part of a series edited by Rabim Jehan Beglu, published by Routledge, New Delhi. The last speaker in today's panel is Dr. Nivedita Ray. She is the Director Research at the ICWA. Her areas of research interest include African Affairs, BRICS, IPSA, Indian Foreign Policy, Indian Diaspora, Maritime Security, Gender, and Conflict Resolution. Her recent books are India's Engagement with East Africa, Opportunities and Challenges, and Tagore, The Eternal Seeker, Footprints of the World Traveller. Her current research project is on Asia and Africa engagement. Before we begin today's proceedings, few customary housekeeping rules. The participants can ask questions by logging into the chat box at the bottom of the page. Click on the guest option, type your name, accept the terms and condition, and join the discussion. The chair will take questions during the Q&A session. Participants are requested to keep their questions clear and brief. With this, I would hand over the proceedings to Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Neha. This is a pleasure and a privilege to be chairing such an eminent panel that has been put together by ICWA. Let me start by thanking ICWA, Mr. T.C. Raghavan and all others who have put together this brilliant discussion that we are going to have about Nelson Mandela, who was an icon of our time, a global leader, not just a leader of South Africa, but a leader revered in India as much as in the rest of the world. A leader who showed the way, fought against racism and apartheid, led his people in a struggle against the most vicious apartheid system that mankind had known. And thereafter, when the fight was won, he laid the foundation for a rainbow nation which accommodated all South Africans and established reconciliation and laid the foundations of democracy in South Africa. So this is the great man whose legacy we are here to honor and celebrate today. During his struggle, and it's necessary for us to recall that during his struggle, he was imprisoned for 27 years, most of which was spent on Robben Island, a barren island off the coast of southern Africa. During this time, he had a small, tiny cell. I had the privilege of visiting that cell with Ahmed Kathrada, another struggle hero who was imprisoned in a cell opposite to that of Nelson Mandela. And I saw that Mandela's cell had a window, the tiny cell had a window, whereas Kathrada's cell had only a small little ventilator. In response to my comment that Mandela's cell seemed to be better than that of Kathrada, to my surprise, Ahmed Kathrada said, "No, my cell is better because if I stand on a chair and look out through the ventilator, sometimes I can see children playing outside." And that one innocent remark brought home to me the pain and the suffering that people who were imprisoned in Robben Island went through in their struggle against apartheid. So, despite this kind of treatment and this kind of suffering that the people in South Africa went through, it is a miracle that Nelson Mandela came as president and established the peace and development and democracy for all South Africans, laying the foundations of a rainbow nation. That is a legacy, I think, that we need to celebrate and remember. During his imprisonment, Mandela never gave up his struggle. He continued to fight, continued to resist. Mac Maharaj, who spent 12 years in Robben Island with Mandela, recalls that once they were being marched in columns to the stone quarry where the prisoners were to work, and in his ears he got a whisper that they should walk slowly, whereas the guards were urging and being very insistent that the prisoners should trot and run to the quarry. But Mac Maharaj thought to himself, it's all very well for Madiba to give these instructions when he is in the middle of the column and I am at the edge of the column facing the guards. Well, very soon he realized that Madiba had smuggled himself to the front of the column and was right there facing the guards, showing the way to all the others who were marching behind. And that was the slowest walk to the quarry that they had ever undertaken. This was the way that he led. He showed from the front, he led from the front, and he showed by example. The Indian origin South Africans, who of course consider themselves as South Africans first and last, they were also very closely intertwined in the struggle against apartheid. And in the prison, there was a committee in which at least 3 Indian origin leaders were there, Kathrada, Mac Maharaj and Lalu Chiba, who helped in transcribing Mandela's autobiographical notes. Lalu Chiba, I'm told, along with others, transcribed it in very tiny handwriting in shorthand, and then they put those pages as the cover of a photo album that was then smuggled out by Mac Maharaj, and that's how the Long Walk to Freedom was smuggled out of Robben Island, according to the stories that I heard in South Africa. Madiba had excellent relationship with India. He acknowledged many times the debt he owed to Mahatma Gandhi and the leadership that Mahatma Gandhi had shown, the philosophy that guided Madiba in his struggle against apartheid. So in April 1997, as president, he set right a historic wrong by offering the freedom of Pietermaritzburg to Gandhi's grandson. This was to right the wrong that had been done to Mahatma Gandhi during the years that he was in South Africa, especially because he was thrown out of a first-class compartment at the railway station in Pietermaritzburg. As president, Mandela came to India more than once, many times. He was awarded Bharat Ratna, India's highest civilian award. He was given the Gandhi Peace Prize. It was during his visit in 1997 that the Red Fort Declaration was signed, which established the strategic partnership between India and South Africa, which has been the guiding foundation of the relationship that we have with South Africa today. Today, India and South Africa are partners in BRICS, in IPSA, in G20, in G77 and NAM and multiple such organizations. So we have a very rich array of history and of current relations between India and South Africa that we can discuss today. And I look forward to hearing from our eminent panelists. If High Commissioner Ndebele is free, I think it would be an opportune time for me to invite him to share his insights. We have all heard the impressive record of service that the High Commissioner has given to his nation and to his people. We welcome you to India, High Commissioner, and we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the background information. That was very, very interesting. The gestation period of the struggle of the people of South Africa was very long. We were the last country in Africa to gain our freedom. That period gave us time to think exactly what type of South Africa we wanted. What indeed were we fighting against? Racism as experienced in South Africa was perhaps like nowhere else. And we had to come to a very clear understanding of what it was that we meant by racism. And here our leaders played such a big role, leadership role, in developing the theory of the South African Revolution. Mandela in the forefront of that with the other leaders. And we came to understand racism in three ways. We spoke of overt racism. Overt racism like you'll see as practiced in Nazi and fascist Italy, where it was naked, it was as it is, and you had to bow to it or fight for your life. But there was also, of course, the overt racism was also what was practiced in South Africa from 1948 in particular, which was open, naked, that white man on top, black man underfoot. There was nothing sophisticated or hidden about that. That was what you call overt racism. But there was also covert racism. The racism that is there, but is not in the statute book, is not written in the law, but is there all the same. And Nelson Mandela taught us to fight that as well, covert racism. But through his leadership and that of Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and many others, they taught us to know that there is also what we call reactive racism. That's a racism of people who have been victims of racism themselves, who then say, let's do unto them as they did unto us. And Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, all of them taught us that no form of racism will ever be accepted. That's why in his speech, Nelson Mandela says, never, never, and never again shall one be oppressor of another. The shortest verse in the Bible is that one in John 11, verse 35, where it says, Jesus wept. On the 13th of July, 1969, Mandela wept. He was alone in his single cell on Robben Island. His white jailers had just carelessly delivered an open telegram that informed him that his son, Thembekile, had died in a car accident. On Monday, 13 July 2020, were he still alive, Mandela would have wept. On that Monday, we all woke up to the news that the beloved last daughter of Nelson and Winnie Mandela, the 59-year-old Zinzi Mandela, away. He loved her dearly. The title of Mandela's biography is The Struggle is My Life. This is the man who dedicated all aspects of his life to the struggle for freedom, public, private, and personal. He has come to symbolize the triumph of the human spirit over all adversity imaginable. The death penalty was grimly expected when the Rivonia trialists were sentenced by Judge Quartus de Wet on 12 June 1964. But international pressure was too much, even for the Kragdadig apartheid regime. Instead, he got imprisonment for life. The expectation was indeed that Mandela would die in prison. He fought and triumphed against the debilitating TB that affected him on Robben Island. His moral superiority against his oppressors saw him triumphantly walk free out of prison after 27 years. Former United Nations Secretary Kofi Annan reminds us that to this day, Madiba remains probably the single most admired, most respected international figure in the world. He continues to inspire millions of people and several generations throughout the world. By continuing to fight for reconciliation before recrimination, healing before bitterness, peace before conflict, by fighting for health, by fighting for education, for the right of every child to have a better start in life. Former United States President Bill Clinton, an admirer of Mandela, once made this profound statement about him, and I quote, "Mandela has taught us so much about so many things. Perhaps the greatest lesson, especially for young people, is that while bad things happen to good people, we still have the freedom and the responsibility to decide how we respond to injustice, cruelty, and violence, and how they will affect our spirits, our hearts, and our minds." In the book, Mandela's Way, his biographer, Richard Stengel, the writer draws our attention to the fact that prison was probably Mandela's greatest teacher. Nelson Mandela had many teachers in his life, but the greatest of them all was prison. Prison molded the man we see today and know today. He learned about life and leadership from many sources, from his rather distant father, from the king of the Tembu who raised him like his son, from his stalwart friends and colleagues, Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, from historical difficulties and head of Winston Churchill and the last. The West and Tolstoy. The things he considers essential to leadership and taught him how to be a full human being. Ahmed Kathrada, a fellow prison librarian with myself and a long-time friend and comrade of Madiba, simply characterizes Madiba as irrepressible. On the epic poem The Cure of Troy, which was inspired by Mandela's return from prison, Nobel laureate for literature Seamus Heaney captures this irrepressible character of Mandela, and I quote, "Human beings suffer, they torture one another, they get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured. History says don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a greater sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. If there is fire in the mountain and lightning and storm, and a God speaks from the sky, that means someone is hearing the outcry and bad cry of a new life at its term. It means once in a lifetime that justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. And indeed, the gem cannot be polished without friction. No man perfected without trials. Take the example of the two stones after we have mined them, coal and gold. Burn both in fire for a long time. Coal will end up becoming useless ash. Gold, on the other hand, value gets added on it after it has gone through extreme heating. So take action, inspire change. In a February 1975 letter to Winnie Mandela, who was incarcerated at Kroonstad prison, Mandela said, "Incidentally, the cell is an ideal place to learn, to know yourself, to reach realistically and regularly the processes of your own mind and feelings. The cell gives you the opportunity to look daily into your entire conduct, to overcome the bad and develop whatever is good." So even in these dark times of pandemic COVID-19, Mandela says to us, let your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. You made some really very valid points. To start with, telling us about the three forms of racism, and reactive racism is what South Africa has attempted to avoid and has successfully avoided, thanks to the leadership provided by its struggle heroes led by Nelson Mandela. Thank you so much also for the warm respect you paid to Madam Zinzi Mandela, who passed away recently. I think we all would like to pay our respect to her and to the bereaved family. With that, let me request Mr. Mandla Langa to share with us his insights of Madiba. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Moderator and Chair. After my leader has spoken, what else can I say to add to that eloquence? I can only speak from my position as a writer, which I think is a little different from the position as an elected representative of the people of South Africa. Being a writer also means that I can be a little irresponsible. It means I can take chances. And recently we had the worldwide outpouring against racism in the movement Black Lives Matter. And it made me think of Nelson Mandela and a poem that was constructed by a friend of mine, Wally Sirote, which goes, "The long, long hours of a series of nightmares that brought us here, with dizzy laughter and anger as empty as fire, here we are now, and still the news never came." For me, this is very important, very instructive, because it speaks of the invincibility of the human spirit. It speaks of how you can cage a person, but you cannot by any stretch of the imagination cage his or her spirit. I would want to observe that the year 2020 is one year more than any or many before it that has brought to the fore the need for conflict resolution, because everywhere you look, something is crumbling. Everywhere there is war and rumors of war. There is strife of biblical proportions, and of course there is pestilence. It's all encompassed in William Yeats' prophetic poem, The Second Coming, where he says, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." I think this is a poem that a lot of people know, a lot of us know, and in a word, it speaks to the fact, to the imperative that the world has got to wake up to the imperative of ethical leadership, a leadership that was exemplified by Madiba, Mandela. He put his country and its people ahead of him. More than that, he was acutely conscious and zealous of the centrality of extending the mantle of peace across the globe, starting with the domestic conflict, which through the bitter decade of the 80s, which Ambassador Ndebele has spoken about, that bitter decade of the 80s, which saw intensifying strife in South Africa, that cost so many lives, upward of 20,000 lives. And there were many problems that were taking place further north that Madiba had to be involved in resolving, but not resolving them as one superhuman being, resolving them also through the agency of the African National Congress and the agency of the multilateral bodies and economic blocs that existed, such as the SADC, the Southern African Development Community, to the United Nations, etc. Nowadays, we are faced with the obscene spectacle of narcissists in power, putting themselves ahead and above people, and thus endangering everyone, because their raison d'etre is not to lead for the commonwealth, for the common good, but to lead because of the issue of power. In South Africa, and this is somewhat hard to say, there is an ongoing attempt here and there to revise history, to dumb down, to belittle the role that Mandela played. And in certain instances, it's to try and paint him as a sellout or a traitor in the parlance of the streets. So it's up to us, really, to ensure that we do something in countering this narrative. I was charged with the task of writing, picking up on the archives and using some of the personalities that had been with Madiba to try and write the 5 years of his years as the President of South Africa. And this was the result of the book, Dare Not Linger. Mine was a very daunting task because in 2016, when the publisher, together with the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory and Mama Grasa, that is Madiba's widow, told me they wished for me to use Mandela's archives together with some of his handwritten notes to complete a task he had set out to achieve, that is, to make a record of his presidential years. I found that intimidating. I write novels and I write short stories, and for me, fiction, you do not have a problem of veracity, you do not have a problem of fact-checking. And here I had to be as scrupulously clean and deal with the facts as they were. But non-fiction has got very rigorous demands of exactitude and faithful adherence to facts, and that proved a bridge too far. But since the subject was a revered icon of the world, I also felt that I felt challenged, and I felt that I want to try and deal with this, and I will use my novelist's skills to try and tell this story. I've said elsewhere that Madiba's story, his story, I employ the narrative device in media res, opening the story with the pivotal moments of his life. It's in December 16, 1997, when Mandela announced to the delegates to the 50th National Conference of the ANC that he was handing over the baton to the presidency of the ANC. He had served a term of 5 years and would not seek another term. This was unprecedented in the ANC. And since the ANC was the engine that drove government and pretty much the life of South Africa, this meant that Madiba was handing over power, immense power. I've said elsewhere that there is no power that can overshadow moral power. Mandela had that in spades, and he would use it for the betterment of humankind. There are very few people that give up power to amass power. Recently, the United Nations in 2018, the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit unanimously adopted a resolution resolving to move beyond words, to redouble efforts towards a peaceful, prosperous new world. This, for me, made me go back to thinking about some of the information that had perhaps not been in the public domain, such as when Madiba was at the helm of brokering the peace in in the DRC, a region that had been riven by war for many, many decades. And one of his more signal actions during that was to try and ensure that people like Mobutu Sese Seko, who had been the leader of this beleaguered place, would not be humiliated. This need to make peace and deal with despots, but at the same time ensure that they are not humiliated in the hands, let's say, of the countries such as the US and the United Kingdom, stretched as far as when there was also the Lockerbie issue that needed resolving, because the Americans wanted to humiliate Muammar Gaddafi, and Madiba had to fight tooth and nail to ensure that this issue is dealt with via the agencies of the UN, meaning the multilateral organizations. So he endangered his own health traveling from Tunis, breaking the embargo, driving across the desert to Tripoli to try and convince Muammar Gaddafi that he had to fall in line with the diktat of the United Nations. Otherwise, he was going to be in trouble with the Americans and the British. We are now in the stage where we have to think differently how we deal with the new world that's unfolding before us. All along, we have been quite comfortable in flying thousands of miles in our aeroplanes to go and attend summits to lower the carbon emissions, going across the globe to deal with global warming, but not employing measures that can, at the end of the day, diminish or lessen the issue of global warming. This new pandemic that is upon us today has given us new instruments, even of dealing with the questions of peace, even of strengthening the multilateral institutions, because with this runaway unipolar world in which we are now living, things are likely to go wrong. I want to end with, since I started with a poem, with another one, but which deals with hope. And in the white gods of the new land, we have been believers, believing in the mercy of our masters and the beauty of our brothers, believing in the conjure of the humble and the faithful and the pure. In our hunger we beheld the welcome table, and in our nakedness the glory of the long white robe. We have been believers in the New Jerusalem. For my people, standing, staring, trying to fashion a better world from confusion, from hypocrisy and misunderstanding, trying to fashion a world that will hold all the people, all the faces, all the Adams and Eves and their countless generations. Let a new earth rise, let another world be born, let a bloody peace be written across the sky, let a beauty full of healing and the strength of final cleansing be the pulsing in our spirits and in our bloods. Let the martial songs be written, let the dirges disappear, let a new race of men and women now rise and take control. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Langa. You spoke only as a writer could have spoken, full of poetry and full of lyricism. We really, I'm sure everybody enjoyed listening to your message of hope at the end of your remarks. I was struck by your comment about the odd narrative against Madiba in South Africa, and I think perhaps later when we have discussion, there may be some other questions about it. But thank you so much for your remarks. Let me now invite Professor Anand Kumar to make his learned remarks. Thank you. And over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Ruchi Ghanshyam ji. And I thank Indian Council of World Affairs for bringing us together to mark Nelson Mandela Day with this kind of a multidimensional meeting. After a great politician from South Africa who was a partner in peace building and a poetic author and writer who put together the details of the life and journey of Nelson Mandela through a very well-known archive. For me, it's a great honor to pay my tribute and share understanding of many concerned and active Indians about the legacy of Dr. Nelson Mandela. Madiba Mandela for us represented a great journey from fear to freedom, from the bottomless pit of hopelessness to the ultimate pinnacle of success, of non-violence and realization of the dream of a democratic future. At this point of time, many of us feel very obliged to Nelson Mandela for his journey to India soon after he realized his dream to pay tribute to Mahatma Gandhi. And we were privileged to see him in person because we were invited to meet him, to say hello to him as representatives of various movements which were with South African struggle through the mission of African National Congress in India for many, many years. And for us, Nelson Mandela represented symbol of non-violence and justice. He was a man who will be remembered for his deep commitment to the power of vision of freedom. And this journey today makes him one of the icons who will be always inspiring wherever there is any instance of seeking justice. When there is a struggle for freedom against authoritarian regimes, not only racist regimes, but all kinds of despotic authoritarian regimes, Nelson Mandela becomes a source of light. If there is a situation of racism, inhumanity, again, Nelson Mandela becomes a source of light, source of energy, as it happened recently in the United States of America. Non-violence, a near impossible way to seek justice, became a reality through this long journey from Robben Island to the capital of South Africa in the persona of Nelson Mandela and many others, including Excellency Ambassador Ndebele here. He exemplified the hope of Mahatma Gandhi when he made a prophecy that I am not one of the best examples of power of truth and power of satyagraha, insistence on truth. In future, there will be better examples, more capable people. And in one way,
Nelson Mandela reached a higher level of achievements by performing in both fields as a protester and again as people's representative in power. He created an ethics of power also. As somebody said in between these two speakers, that he was a rare example of a person in power who voluntarily created a space for the next generation to come over, like a guardian, like a father figure. So I have great respect for him because of his two ideal roles. One role of self-introspection, interrogating himself in the middle of struggle, and then making a great leap from a particular way of protesting to another way, totally different, polar opposite, from a journey of violence to journey of non-violence. And then the second role, as person in power. Unfortunately, in most of the world, heroes of freedom struggles failed to remain heroes of freedom building. When they came into power, they lost their vision, they lost their way, they became obsessed, paranoid. But Nelson Mandela was one who started his journey with faith in people's power and ended his journey with faith in the next generation. He is a story of freedom building, peace building, reconciliation. I remember at this point, people like Bishop Tutu, Fatima Mir, Ila Gandhi, Arisitas, many facets of Nelson Mandela in public spaces, public sphere. For me, it was great to have a partnership with South African intellectuals and students to Global Studies program at Jawaharlal, where South African scholars, Indian scholars, German scholars, Argentinians, Thailand scholars, they put together a scheme of global studies, and students of all parts of the world were brought into one classroom, moving from one part of the world to another part of the world. And this is what we have to do to realize the dream of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela has left a legacy which has to grow further. The struggle against oppression, the struggle against injustices, the struggle against inequalities is still growing. And in that, he becomes a pillar to construct the next level of our togetherness as human beings. I have a feeling that today's world is not going to be listening to the voice of Nelson Mandela very carefully, including the power elite of Africa. They think that people like Mandela, ranging from Gandhi to Martin Luther King, are people of another era, of another age, which is absolutely wrong. We are in a journey where the path has been shown by great walkers like Nelson Mandela, but we have to walk further. The world has not arrived at the ultimate human destiny of freedom with justice, peace with joy, of togetherness. The inequalities are growing. The contradictions are becoming sharper. Nation states are oscillating between globality of power and locality of powerlessness. The dream of democracy has to grow further, get deeper, become more pragmatic and more practical for ordinary people, not with much money, not with much resources, not with much cultural capital. Therefore, let me conclude my brief tribute from a generation of dreamers of democracy that we have moved from hope to hopelessness in recent decades, where to return to the story of struggles like South African struggles against apartheid, Indian struggle against imperialism, and today's struggles have to be seen in an organic togetherness. And that's where Mandela is a great bridge between the generation of Gandhis to the generation of today. I hope that Indian Council of World Affairs will take care of engaging Indian minds about things beyond United States of America and China, the two poles of world order. There are many more words in the making, including this story, which is narrated through the journey of people of South Africa against racism. Racism is still one of the major contradictions of human order, and that has to be interrogated further, resolved further in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. Truth is there, but reconciliation is missing. Let us take inspiration from the life story and the story of successes and failures of the struggle against racism around the world, which ultimately found best and most beautiful expression in the life journey of Dr. Nelson Mandela. I salute his memory, and I hope that generations will remain connected with his dreams and will remain true to his legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kumar, for highlighting the importance of the legacy of Nelson Mandela to today's world and to today's generation. Thank you once again for your remarks, and I now invite Professor Neera Chandhoke to make her remarks. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Ambassador Ghanshyam. And thank you to ICWA for resurrecting the spirit of solidarity among people of the Global South. We seem to have lost track of that original movement which brought together people who have been colonized and who suffered a great deal and who put up a determined front against all kinds of things, including apartheid in South Africa. Now, 18th July is Nelson Mandela Day, International Day. And it led me to think, I wrote a short piece for The Wire on Saturday saying, why do we remember this leader and not that leader? Why do we remember Mandela? We can say a whole range of things about him, but what I would like to do is to concentrate on what he taught us as somebody who belongs to the Global South and who is probably living among the same contradictions as the South African people are. I think Mandela was one leader who had tremendous generosity, tremendous imagination, and tremendous courage. And that imagination and generosity reminded me of something that Adam Smith in the 18th century had spoken of, and that is sympathy. And I'll come back to the idea of sympathy, but first let me go on to the first contribution of Nelson Mandela. You see, he admitted that the fight against apartheid is a long march. It is not going to be solved very easily. And he said, we will pass through the valleys of shadow before we reach the sunlight of freedom. We will stumble, we will make mistakes, but we will arrive there. The origins of Mandela's leadership of the African National Congress actually go back to the 1940s when the ANC, which had been constructed in 1912, was kind of stagnating. And he, along with Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, resurrected African National Congress and set it on a path of confrontation with the white apartheid regime. And in that confrontation, they used all the methods that Gandhi had devised for India. But speaking as an Indian and speaking as somebody who has followed Gandhian thought very carefully, I do not think we should overestimate the impact of Gandhi on Mandela, because I think Mandela dealt with issues that India never had to deal with, institutionalized racism. On the 31st of December 1999, Mandela wrote a piece, published in the Time magazine on his political gurus, in which he spoke about Gandhi and he said, I honor him for his genius in advocating nonviolence in an age of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I honor him for his morality in the days of capitalism. And I honor him for his emphasis on self-interest instead of individual interest. India was the land of his birth, Mandela spoke about Gandhi, but South Africa was his land of adoption. Both Gandhi and I inherited colonized countries, and we set forth to mobilize our people in the cause of freedom. But But there was a limit to Gandhian politics of non-violence, and that happened in 1960 when the great bloodshed happened in Sharpeville, happened in South Africa. And that was the time that Mandela left his politics of non-violence and opted to become the chair of the Umkhonto, or the chair of the nation. And he paid for it. When he was sentenced to 27 years of imprisonment, it was for the acts that they had committed in pursuit of freedom, because they realized that non-violence is not going to work in such an atmosphere of fear and trepidation as the South African white regime had created. It is also true that the international community did not take the South African struggle seriously till 1960 and the whole issue of Sharpeville and earlier Soweto. It was then that the momentum began to build up in the United Nations, but international opinion was not very strong. It became strong only after 1960. In prison, Mandela started reflecting. And the one question that confronted him in the late 1980s, when the apartheid regime reached out to the ANC for a guided transition to democracy, how do people who are perverse history have locked into the role of oppressor and oppressed learn to live together in a democratic South Africa? South Africa did not face the problem that India faced. Our colonizer went back to England. Imperialism remains, that is a fact. But in South Africa, Mandela recognizes, and this is an indication of his generosity, the Afrikaner had nowhere to go. They had forged a very distinctive identity from the Dutch people, from where they came. And he asked him, where will they go? How can we throw them out? And there were groups among the Africans who were saying, throw the whites out. We are going to move to majoritarian democracy and we want rule. And Mandela thought about it, and his first speech when he was released from prison in 1990 showed his genius. He said, South Africa is for everybody, whites and blacks. I'm against white domination, I'm also against black domination. Setting the stage for a multi-party democracy and inclusive democracy. The second landmark speech of his, which I think laid the foundation of democracy. Democracy is not only a relationship between the state and the people. Democracy is a relationship between the people, between the citizens. You must feel that you are fellow citizens of a political community. And it is well known that the Afrikaner, the leadership, wanted in a short place on the seat of power. They wanted some kind of power still in the negotiations with the ANC. If they didn't want a separate homeland, they at least wanted assurances that they will continue to remain in power, because the Afrikaners were very different from the British. But that's a different kind of a debate. Chris Hani, one of the most beloved leaders of South Africa, was assassinated, if I'm not mistaken, in April 1993. And South Africa was an uproar. There were people on the streets because he was a racist. He was connected to a racist right-wing organization that was against majoritarianism or democracy for the South Africans and for the colored, the blacks and the colored. And Mandela steps into this particular furor, this anger. International commentators were saying South Africa is going to lapse into civil war, there will be bloodbath, and he comes on to South African Broadcasting Corporation, television and radio, and says, we are both mourning the death of Chris Hani, both whites and blacks. And that was the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment philosopher Adam Smith, who said, we can feel the pain of others because we have the gift of imagination. And Mandela said, if the whites are really feeling sorry about Hani, we must together move as a nation, as a political community, as a democracy. He assured the whites that there would be no bloodbath, there will not be any kind of reprisal. And the final speech, which set its stamp upon his credentials as a Democrat, was when the ANC wins elections and he becomes a president, and he says, we have suffered enough, now let us move forward. And this gives us the last point which I want to talk upon, and which I think has a lesson to teach everybody, including India, because India was also born out of violence, the violence of the partition. which many people still have not forgotten. Mandela realized, and he probably asked himself the question, has anything been served by retributive justice of the Nuremberg model? Can anything be, will we live in peace? The whites who were our former oppressors are going to live with us as fellow citizens, share the same institution, share the market, share opportunities, share fellow feeling. And nothing is ever served out of violence. This is his second U-turn. And he opts for reconciliation and sets up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But this was not the first time the TRC had been set up. I feel very foolish talking to distinguished Africans about African history. But this is our common history because we have to learn from each other. And one of the first TRC was set up in Uganda, and then transitional societies were experimenting with Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mandela determined when he set up the TRC, when he announced the setting up the TRC, we must come to terms with the past. We are not going to benefit. If we keep remembering what has happened to us, we must remember what we must remember in the right way. And this is what he teaches. We must learn from history. We must know where we have come from. We cannot understand our present unless we know our past and the roads that we followed. But we must know how to remember correctly. And the two themes of the TRC that Mandela outlined were accountability and amnesty. I'm sorry, and in a way, he encouraged perpetrators of political crimes, of major violations of human rights. He told them, accept that you have done wrong, and we will give you amnesty. And he encouraged the victims of human rights violations to come and talk about, I'm sorry, this phone is giving me trouble. To come and talk about their oppression. It was a Freudian strategy that if you repress memories of brutality, they're going to come up. Societies are fragile if they keep remembering the past, because they can be set on fire easily. Come to terms with the past, accept that horrible things have been done in horrible ways, and we will never repeat it. We will learn from history, not reenact history. I think that is a lesson all of us have to learn. All of us have to understand the past is there. We cannot ignore it. We cannot ignore the past of, say, communal violence in India, but we must determine that we learn from the past. And this is Mandela's contribution to our sensibility, our collective politics, our politics of forgiveness, our politics of acceptance, our politics of accepting the past must never be repeated. And South Africa's transition to majority rule defied each dire prediction of Western commentators that South Africa would descend into civil war. And for that, I have nothing but the utmost admiration for Nelson Mandela. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Chandhoke, for that brilliant overview of how we must learn to live with the past and how Nelson Mandela has shown the way in that regard. Now, we are a bit short on time, so I would immediately hand over to Dr. Nivedita Ray for her remarks. Over to you, Dr. Nivedita Ray.
Thank you, Chair, and a very good afternoon, everyone. As the last speaker, I may sound some of the themes that has already been touched upon. From an Indian perspective, I would like to reflect some of Mandela's contributions to South Africa and Africa, and also touch a little bit on how his interface with India and India-South Africa relations. Coming to the questions of contributions to South Africa, I think Mandela's contribution to South Africa are incomparable. I mean, he made South Africa in many ways something bigger than what it was. I think the most profound thing about Nelson Mandela was the concept of forgiveness. That question of forgiveness was key to taking South Africa from extraordinary violence and bitterness to a country in which we can say at least that people who at one stage hadn't known each other or hated each other terribly actually can live together, even though in a very imperfect way. As a leader, he, despite being imprisoned for 27 years during the apartheid regime, bore no grudge against his oppressors. Such concept of forgiveness as was articulated through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which already so extensively spoken by Professor Neera Chandhoke, is in my view the most powerful legacy of Mandela, which buried the dreadful era of apartheid and saw both the former oppressors and oppressed holding hands for betterment of New South Africa. The fact that he could encourage everyone to join hands in reconciliation and unity reflects a lot about his personality and his strong moral leadership. To say that his job was not a daunting, was definitely a daunting task. It reflects somewhat a fusion of collaborative, but a very firm leadership. And what is remarkable in his distinctive diplomatic style and leadership was often referred to as Madiba magic, where he could quote both friend and foe towards a diplomatic approach to resolve the South African paradox. And coming to the question of leadership, which has already been, spoken by my previous speakers, I would say that within South Africa, as a leader, we saw how Mandela recognized his limits and set forth the smooth transition to a new leadership when the time came for him to welcome his successor. Mandela just served his 1 5-year term and then retired in 1999. This is something that is very important too in the context of Africa today, which is home to many of the world's longest ruling heads of state. Some of the post-colonial leaders in 1960s and 70s sought to become president for life, with several managing to remain in power for 3 or more terms. But of course, now we see the train has been reversing, and we see that since 2015, there has been certain kind of progress made where we see it, some 26 transfers of powers have taken place. But this has been partly due to the sustained pressure by civil society groups and region blocs. But the fact that Mandela set an example for others to follow is something that we take as a recognition that we need to take note of when we talk about his leadership values for other leaders in Africa. Second aspect I would like to highlight where his brief struggle in the context of Africa, which I see as Mandela not only dedicated his life to apartheid struggle in South Africa, but his whole life was dedicated to the struggle of African people. And in his struggle, I think one of the important aspects of his struggle was a philosophy that embodied his values was value of Ubuntu, which literally mean and I am because we are, and which Mandela himself defined as that profound Africa sense that we are human beings, only through the humanity of other human beings. That was something was very, very underlying principle of philosophy that ran to, that became a part of his, that defined his whole struggle and his thinking about his contributions to Africa. Mandela was very clear that his life was linked to the collective struggles of humans everywhere. And that is why he cherished the ideals of democratic and free society. In one of his speeches, he remarked, the ideal of democratic and free society is one for which I am prepared to die. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. And this is something in Africa, if you see, in much of the democratic progress that is seen across the continent and tied in some way to the inspiration of Nelson Mandela that he has set. Mandela also encouraged African nations to resolve conflicts through diplomacy and reconciliation. He was involved in various peace deal and political negotiations, including Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, Nigeria, and other countries in Africa and elsewhere. And I also believe that as a believer in the principle of democratic socialism, Nelson Mandela also championed the cause of Global South. And his whole approach, if he was to deal with international issues, was based on the norms of non-confrontation and negotiations, coupled with a commitment for global equity. The establishment of a peaceful and equitable world order, therefore, constituted the template of his worldview. So though he was criticized by the West for his sympathy and solidarity with the leading revisionist voices from the South, he was an effective channel of communication between the Western powers and their so-called pariah counterparts on various contested issues. So to take that, Mandela's sustained effort to live up to his cherished ideals of global equity has made him an inspirational figure across the rest of the world. But he's also a man who was impacted by inspirations on others. And here I would come to India connection and Gandhi. At the philosophical level, I thought Mandela's method of reconciliation to address socio-political issues carries reflections from the Gandhian thought of nonviolence with truthfulness as a common source of motivation for both the thinker-activist. Coming to the aspect of his interface with India, I think as a recipient of several Indian awards and honors, Mandela has time and again appreciated and expressed gratitude for India's active role in the anti-apartheid struggle, particularly internationalizing the racial oppression in South Africa in different fora, including in the United Nations, the Commonwealth, and the non-alignment movement. In the words of Mandela, I quote, "India came to our aid when the rest of the world stood by or gave succor to our oppressor. And it was the first country to sever trade and diplomatic relations with Pretoria in 1946 in protest against its racial policies." So this is what I just wanted to highlight, that after Mandela became, and when you look at his interface with Africa, after he became the president also, he undertook two significant visits to India, and that was in year 1995 and 1997, which was in a way very significant when we talk of Mandela's connections with India. How already so much has been talked in how Mandela is revered in India, but coming in the diplomatic context, I would say that his contribution was immense. First, in his first visit, the possibility of Indian Ocean a trading bloc, Indian Ocean Dream Association, regional cooperation consisting of several nations was conceptualized, wherein discussions were held to propose a charter and objectives of them. And today, if you look at IORA stands as one of a dynamic organization of 22 member states and 10 dialogue partners. And this was something I think is his contribution to his vision to change the world for a better. And that is where we connect with this global icon when we talk about a historical context and relations with South Africa and the Mandela connections in India-South Africa relations. And second, of course, was mentioned by Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam about his significant one of the significant aspects of the second visit was transforming India-South Africa friendly relations into a strategic partnership, giving economic content and given primacy. So I would say that, when we talk of Mandela's interface with India, I think it has shaped the South-South solidarity that remains a very empowering discourse in global politics. And his ideas of achieving equity through peaceful coexistence, dialogue and reconciliation have been a source of African empowerment, and which has also become an inspiration for our world at large. I would say that though this is something that is in work in progress, but for Africa, as an analyst looking at African affairs, I would say, however, Africa is yet to achieve its holistic emancipation, which lies in the optimal realization of Mandela's ideals by the current leaderships in Africa, and so as he remains an empowering kind of inspiration for all of us here in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nivedita Ray, for those very comprehensive remarks, where you very well touched upon the struggle, the support that India rendered to South Africa's struggle against apartheid over the years, and the contribution that Nelson Mandela himself played in the strengthening of India-South Africa relations during his presidency. With that, there are so many questions. I don't know if there is time to answer them all. Maybe His Excellency, the High Commissioner, if you would like to comment a little bit on India-South Africa relations and how you are trying to promote our bilateral relationship in this times of COVID, because there are some questions that are there about the inequality imposed by COVID
So I thought, let me take this opportunity before we close to at least request you for your comments on how you are, in which direction you are trying to take India-South Africa relations during these challenging times of COVID and multiple global foreign policy challenges that we face.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for very captivating inputs that have been made here today. Perhaps the one aspect that we, other than the political, historical, cultural relations between South Africa and India, we are pushing very hard to strengthen and make concrete, particularly the cultural relations that exist between South Africa and India. You know, of course, that from 1860, we have got a huge Indian population in South Africa that is originally from India, but emphatically South African. But those cultural ties remain such that the relations between us through those ties have made us more one people. It's not strange for me in India that I find it a strange diet. The diet that I'll have in South Africa, the curry that I love very much, I'll find that same curry in India. And if you can connect people through what they eat, how they dress, how they celebrate, and those ties are no longer just ties that are written on paper. And therefore the push to ensure, to strengthen and make manifest the cultural relations through religion, through culture, it's very much in our agenda. And the COVID-19 has really disturbed a very, very active program that we have with each other. But there are many of those ties, whether economic, cultural, historical, that are very manifest, and we were able to build on them, and we're building on them.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for sharing your thoughts with us on this. There is also a question on how to take Mandela's message to the youth of today. I thought Professor Anand Kumar could talk about that a little bit, because you did speak about these issues in your talk. Thank you.
Well, Excellency, this is a very important dimension for the policymakers as well as intellectuals of today, because the footsteps into future are very critical for us. At this point, as I said, the ethos of globalization has made us insensitive about a variety of incomplete projects of the makers of modern times, including Nelson Mandela. We think that we have arrived. Nothing more is to be done collectively. We have our personal self as the primary responsibility, and the idea of collectivity has to be negotiated in some kind of abstract manner, and the idea of inequality is part of the past. As I said, the experiment we did with the South African University partnership, particularly the Durban University, KwaZulu-Natal University, made us realize that we have so many interconnectivities among the younger people, and their concerns are certainly not related with our concerns in a primary way. Their concerns are futuristic. And here, a person like Mandela and his life story is a journey, as I said, from hope hopelessness of the present into the hopefulness of future, with positivity, with creativity, and with going beyond the given frames of interactions and institutions. So, apart from what Indian schools can do with the adolescent classes of teaching beyond the stories of Rajas and Ranis of our past, or the Georges and Edwards and others, we have to bring these heroes of modern times, makers of modern times, from non-European, non-American frames. And secondly, the principles which were underlined and lived by people like Mandela in the journey towards better democracy. This idea of democracy as a growing dream was something very prominently underlined by Nelson Mandela, first as people's leader and second as president of a new republic. And that craft, that art, is to be transferred to the people's representatives of today. And there, I guess, the political parties of India and the political parties of South Africa can have more interactivity, more coming and going. And I'm very happy that the present ambassador of South Africa is a mass leader, a man who knows what it means, what it takes to represent people against the system. So this art of democracy, as Professor Neera Chandhoke said, connecting not between state and people, citizen and state, but also people and people. That is something, multiculturality, multiraciality, multireligiosity. This is the food which is being cooked today by the new generation, and that's where we have to help them as kitchen attendants.
Thank you so much. I think both you and the High Commissioner highlighted the importance of people-to-people contacts and relations. I think in that context, there's one more question which is, I think, very pertinent for Mr. Langa, because he referred to the narrative that is there against Mandela in some quarters in South Africa. I think it would be useful to hear from him what is being done in South Africa to counter such narratives. That's one of the questions that has come. If you can do so very, very briefly, because we are very close to 5 p.m. now. Thank you.
There's a lot of, in the intellectual or in the sphere of writing, where very many writers, young people, are reclaiming that legacy that was put or given us by Nelson Mandela. Yesterday, for instance, on the Sunday newspapers, there was a very huge article by one writer who was castigating the people or that trend that seeks to minimize the role of Nelson Mandela or to paint him as a traitor or as somebody that was not working towards the revolution. But I want to put another point when it comes to the integration or the exchanges between India and South Africa to maximize the understanding of culture from the two continents, as it were. Because in India you've got, for instance, a very important Jaipur festival, literary festival, that can invite South African writers so that there could be those exchanges and vice versa. In South Africa, we've got a lot of writers' festivals, and we could invite writers from India. My daughter, who is a very, very huge fan of Indian Bollywood, is always harassing us to show kids one of the Bollywood extravaganzas on television. So there is a synergy. But finally, the area of writing, the area of dance, the area of music, the area of broadcasting leaves us very capable to cement our relationship. As for Madiba's stature, Mandela was too big a person to be brought down by the hollow howls of gadflies. And I do believe that his image is not about to be tarnished.
Thank you so much. I think what you say is really gives a sense of hope and is very relevant. As we are now completely out of time, I apologize to all those whose questions have not been addressed during this event. I would also like to take this chance to thank all the panelists, eminent panelists, for the very insightful discussion that we had today, and thank ICWA for giving us this opportunity. With this, let me hand over to Dr. Neha Sinha, who will do a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. On behalf of ICWA, I would like to thank our distinguished chair and panelists for taking out time from their packed schedule and joining us for the discussion. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to all the participants who have joined from different parts of the world. The webinar would not have been possible without the valuable guidance and support of the Director General ICWA, Dr. T.C. Raghavan. My sincere thanks to the Deputy Director General, Mr. Shoman Bagchi. I would also like to thank Ms. Nutan Kapoor Mahavar, JS, ICWA and her office for their constant support towards the preparation of this webinar. I would be failing in my part if I don't express my gratitude to the research wing of ICWA, starting from Director Research Dr. Nivedita Ray and my colleagues for their valuable inputs and support. Special thanks to my colleagues at the IT and seminar section for ensuring the smooth running of the webinar. With this, I would like to close my remarks and announce the end